Hi there, I'm Adam Leventhal. Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast. Coming up, the summer transfer window doesn't open until mid-June, yet Chelsea are not waiting around, having already agreed deals for Dario Essugo and Geovany Quenda. So why are Chelsea doing their business so early, and should other clubs be following suit? Well, with me for this one is our Chelsea reporter, Simon Johnson, and Tim Spiers as well. Simon, let's start with you. What are the deals then that Chelsea have already agreed ahead of this summer window, the eager beavers?
Well, apart from the two you've already mentioned, there's a few more that will be joining up with the club this summer. Kendry Spiers, a deal that was done a couple of years ago, he's actually already started doing some assimilation, some sort of integration. He's been at Coham for a few weeks and so on. There's Estival Willian, the sort of the rising star of Brazilian football, coming from Palmeiras. And then in January they signed, very difficult negotiation, this one. They signed Mamadou Sarr from their sister club, Strasbourg, a centre-back who'll also be coming in. So that's three players, plus Essugo, who's coming in this summer. In Quenda's case, he'll be arriving in the summer of 2026. So a bit more of a wait to see him in action.
Why, in particular, those two players, Essugo and Quenda? What's the background on them?
Well, I'll start with Essugo simply because he's actually going to be joining first. So what Chelsea want is they feel there's an absence or a lack of backup for Moises Caicedo, and they see him as someone that can provide that backup. They also moved for him early because they're aware of 5-6 clubs that were keen to get him as well. So they didn't want to get beaten to him. So that's why. And Quenda, it's Chelsea love wingers. This guy is they see as one of the best young wingers or youngsters in the world, along with Estival Willian and Yamal of Barcelona. They put him on. They sort of see him in that sort of caliber of player. And again, they move for him because of the competition for him. Of course, Manchester United were very keen on him. There was another club currently in the top 3 that were making strong moves to sign him. I think there were clubs in Europe too. So it's a case of Chelsea not wanting to be beaten to the punch, and they see him spending another year at Sporting as giving him that extra bit of experience, so that by the time he joins up with Chelsea, he'll have played like a good 100 games and be ready to make an impact.
Yeah, and there's a piece out now on The Athletic on Quenda from Liam Toomey and Jack Lang mentioning those similarities with Lamine Yamal. So if that all comes out, then Chelsea might have a real gem. But they are still signing prospects, aren't they? And I guess that will frustrate the fans again.
Yeah, Chelsea fans are in a sort of perennial state of frustration. I mean, it's a totally different way of operating than they're used to from the Roman Abramovich era, where by and large Chelsea bought finished articles that would come in, slot straight in, and needed no time to adapt and fulfil their potential because they'd already fulfilled their potential elsewhere. There will be frustration because they'll sort of see, well, why aren't Chelsea concentrating on a centre forward? That's been the sort of the one of the big sort of gaping holes in this squad. Well, Chelsea are working on a centre forward, but there's no guarantees this will be an Andrei Shevchenko or a Fernando Torres that Chelsea spent an absolute fortune on in the Abramovich time, who neither of them particularly succeeded. But Chelsea are working on a centre forward and another winger because, of course, they have to replace the currently suspended Mikhailo Mudryk, and of course, they're concerns that he's facing a lengthy ban if his B sample comes up, if his doping test comes up positive as well.
I mean, you mentioned a couple of the other players who are also essentially prospects, but very gifted at the same time, the likes of Estival, Andre Santos, Kendry Spiers as well. Do you know if they are going to be ready for next season in terms of having an impact in the first team, or is that very much TBC?
Definitely two of the three. I'm pretty convinced by, as things stand. Andre Santos, who's had a really good loan at Strasbourg, of course, didn't really do anything in his first loan at Nottingham Forest. Was barely played there, but since he's gone to Strasbourg, he's become and emerged as one of, if not the best midfielder in Liga. So Chelsea wants to recall him, and understandably so, but he has been quoted talking a little bit mixed messages about where his future lies, leaving that little door ajar as players like to do. But he's certainly someone that Chelsea value sort of really highly and rate very highly. Esteval Willian is definitely going to be a part of things. And obviously so, as I said, he's the rising star of Brazilian football. The only question mark is Kendry Paez, who has had a little bit of a tricky time since agreeing to join Chelsea, perhaps taking his eye off the ball a little bit back home whilst playing for Independiente. But in saying that, I have been told that he's being seen as kind of like talking of backups, kind of sort of seeing as a backup role for Enzo Fernandez. So certainly, look, Chelsea haven't bought these guys just to sort of make up the numbers. They're seen as three very exciting prospects.
Let's bring Tim in on the conversation, because I know that your opinion on Chelsea this season, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it sort of ebbed and flowed a little bit. June is going to mark the third anniversary of the Clear Lake and, Todd Boehly's £2.3 billion takeover of Chelsea. Have you worked out what the transfer strategy is now? I mean, it looks relatively obvious that they're buying prospects for the future, but do you think that it's workable?
I mean, I'm sure that there are very well thought out strategies in place, and squad planning and succession planning, and things are only done via very rigorous scouting and sort of lengthy negotiations and sound financial planning. I'm sure all that does happen, but from the outside, apart from sort of the recurring theme of youth, in terms of an overall strategy, it's hard to put your finger on it, especially when there's sort of like these countless examples of unusual things happening, right? The club doing one thing and then 6 months later doing another. I mean, this has been happening for a few years now, but even just taking very recent examples such as, Joao Felix coming in, which everyone was very surprised about for a lot of money at the end of the last window and then loaned out in the next window. Renato Vega, I thought, was a really strange one because he seemed to be doing really well and seemed to fit the mould of a young player, bought for a decent price, and I think he played 18 times in all comps and wasn't a regular starter but was a very good squad player. Broke into the Portugal squad. I watched him a couple of times for Portugal at centre-half. I thought it was great, and then all of a sudden he's out on loan again in January, so that's a strange one. You got Trevor Chalobah being sent out, no squad number, bomb squad, seemingly no future, and then he's brought back as the sort of defensive saviour in January. All that kind of suggests muddled thinking, I guess. Sancho on the horizon as another decision that went one way and is going to go another, and then for a club that buys and buys and buys, doesn't buy a goalkeeper in January, which is just bizarre to me, because it seemed obvious last August that that was their weakest position. I remember us talking about it on this podcast, saying that they're going to need a goalkeeper at some point. Mistakes over the season have only sort of exacerbated that. So all those things are just odd. They don't point to a strategy. I really admire what they're doing in terms of scouring the world for sort of Simon talks about the next big things in Brazilian football, and that's great. But who's to say he won't be sold again in a year's time? That's just what they do. And then you throw into that Maresca, who's got this very specific style, and the players that are bought in. I remember when Pedro Neto left my club Wolves, and kind of he's counter-attack through and through, and he's all about quick play, and then he's playing in this sort of pedestrian passing game. Yeah, none of that makes sense to me, Adam.
Can I quickly jump in? Thankfully, because Tim's just sort of it's hard sometimes to remember everything that Chelsea are doing off the top of your head. It talks about goalkeepers. So another one that's coming in the summer that I left off at the top of the show, Mike Penders, who's sort of seen as the next Thibaut Courtois in Belgium. He's coming from Genk. So there's another goalkeeper to add to the sort of the the cosy dressing room corner that's going to be the goalkeeping department.
Just correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, and Tim mentioned it there. Yes, they're buying prospects, they're buying the next big thing, but it's not akin to Brighton, for example. And I know Brighton have spent money on some next big things as well, but they are buying very obvious next big things, it seems, and paying a premium for them. It's not like they're getting bargains and unearthing gems from absolutely nowhere, are they?
I would argue that there's sort of a bit of both.
Okay.
Sort of. So in Kendry Piers' case, he's in the. I'm trying to remember his fee, but it was below 20 million. There's a lot of sums in that sort of department. Yes, there are some extraordinary sums like Casado coming at 115. You've got Mikhailo Mudryk, which was 62 with load of add-ons included. There are some big signings in there for big money, but I think actually a lot of the frustration that the Chelsea fans feel is that they don't go out and say, goalkeeper, going on to Tim's point, let's go get the best keeper in the world. Instead, they've spent 25 million on Rob Sanchez. They spent a similar amount on Jorgensen, on Petrovic, sort of like these sort of so-so goalkeepers. I mean, I actually think their best goalkeeper, Petrovic, is on loan at Strasbourg. Which is a bizarre turn of events. He actually did all right in the second half of last season, but Maresca wanted, for some reason, Rob Sanchez. He saw as better with the ball at his feet. And that sort of left little room for Petrovic. And as we've seen over the last, 7 months, we've seen very little evidence of Robert Sanchez being particularly good with the ball at his feet. If anything, he's been one of the sort of biggest problems Chelsea have had to cope with, because he keeps giving the ball away in dangerous areas.
Now, many people will have seen Jadon Sancho arrive at Chelsea and make an impact, and it looked as if he'd been, released from the negative situation at Manchester United and was going to blossom. But just outline exactly what the agreement is with Manchester United if he doesn't end up signing at Chelsea permanently.
Yeah, so there's been a lot sort of said about that there's being a penalty fee, and the Athletic revealed earlier this week that penalty fee, which essentially is the loan fee, will be £5 million. Chelsea didn't pay a loan fee to begin with. They're paying around half of his wages at Manchester United. So when you actually look at the structure of the deal, whilst it hasn't eventually worked out, because I actually thought Jadon Sancho made a pretty promising start to his Chelsea career. Certainly the first half of the season, he quickly matched the amount of assists that he got at Manchester United within a short amount of time. The Chelsea fans were chanting his name, but a bit like Chelsea themselves under Maresca, the last 2 or 3 months he's gone off the boil, and it's looking increasingly like, although I'm assured that no decision has been made yet and that it will be assessed at the end of the season, but it's looking, I'll be surprised as things stand if Jadon Sancho ends up a Chelsea player still, because it just feels like the mood has started to shift towards him going back to Manchester United. And I have to say, for £5 million and half his wages, it suddenly doesn't look like a horrifically expensive mistake, even though it hasn't particularly worked out brilliantly.
For other departures this summer, what are the murmurings of ones that maybe aren't out there yet?
Well, essentially, the loan players is where Chelsea are looking to not only sell but to fund the big purchase of a striker and another winger. Apart from Andrés Santos, although I carefully add that, of course, no player. There's always that room for manoeuvre if a club came in and made a stupid offer for someone. I think Chelsea are always going to sort of perhaps listen to it. But as I said earlier, Santos is being lined up to be part of the squad. So then you're looking at players like Axel Disasi, who's on loan at Aston Villa and seems to have made a good impact there, and certainly enjoying his football more there than he did at Chelsea. the goalkeeper is another goalkeeper in Kepa at Bournemouth. Of course, it's time for him to move on for sure. Armando Broja, who they tried to sell last summer, they'll try again. Currently on loan at Everton. Ben Chilwell, Raheem Sterling. How long have you got, Adam? It's quite a long list.
And just a word from you, Simon, because I wanted to throw a question to Tim. And this leads us there. How much of a say does Enzo Maresca get on all of this in terms of recruitment?
Oh, he has his say. It's a bit like any Chelsea head coach in previous years. They have their say. Question marks over how much of a say. I mean, Chelsea's long-term strategy is always going to be in the minds of the co-owners and the recruiting team, led by the co-sporting directors Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart. Chelsea aren't going to give the keys to the kingdom. They're not going to make the mistake that Manchester United made with Ten Hag, for example. This is the whole point of having a sporting structure, is having people that oversee a strategy, which, whether Chelsea fans like it or not, we've all seen. This is what we're on the show to talk about: young players with potential that hopefully will come good and become world stars. But yeah, he'll have his say. I mean, we've seen him leave players out very early on in last summer's pre-season. As I've already mentioned, it was his decision to make Rob Sanchez the first choice goalkeeper over Petrovic. So he will have his moments, but I think the general philosophy is still that the ship is still being steered by the people above him.
And that said, Tim, I suppose you have to assess how well Maresca has done this season. Obviously, they're fourth in the table at the moment, and many people after their recent season struggles will see that as a success. But how much impact is he going to have in the summer? And therefore, if he's going to be asked who he thinks he wants to work with next season, does that lead us to think that there's going to be plenty of players on the periphery and another sort of bomb squad situation this summer?
I mean, well, there are, by virtue of having so many players on the books, it's hard to avoid some kind of bomb squad scenario. I think we probably gave them all a little bit too much stick for that last summer. They were trying to get rid of some players on very high wages, Sterling and Chilwell, etc., who hadn't sort of done it for a while, but Chelsea they make themselves such an easy target because they spend so much money. I mean, Maresca's future's a really interesting issue. The sort of contradiction, and he had it at Leicester, to be fair, the contradiction between what the players think of him and what the fans think of him generally seems to be pretty different. I can't remember if it was you, Simon, or Liam on Straight Outta Cobham highlighting a quote from Levi Colwill, basically saying this guy's light years ahead, talking about Maresca, light years ahead of sort of managers that he's worked with, or in terms of where football is at now tactically and where it's going to be in the future. And he's worked with some top managers for Chelsea and Brighton and England. I remember seeing this at Wolves years ago under Glenn Hoddle. The players absolutely loved Glenn Hoddle. They thought he was fantastic, technically gifted, could teach some things they'd never heard before. But the football was really boring and stifling, and technically very lovely, but dull. And the fans wanted him out, and ultimately, he didn't last too long. So I think that's going to be an important issue for the summer, and whether Chelsea continue to progress naturally over the next sort of couple of years. And he has, you can argue about the football, but he has made a good improvement there. They've gone from 12th to 6th, potentially 4th this year, and winning a trophy on top of that. If they win the Conference League as they should do, then that's a pretty successful season, I think. Despite the money that they've spent.
And Simon, how much of this sort of early business being done is based on the fact that this summer is going to be particularly hectic with the Club World Cup and Chelsea participating in that in the States?
It is a big factor because obviously the time of the Club World Cup, and if Chelsea, as they hope, get to the final, which is on July the 13th, it is a massive hindrance to their pre-season. Essentially, this will be treated as their pre-season. That means they want players, the new additions, to be part of the squad. Of course, Esteval William will be playing for Palmeiras, so he can't join up. But they want the bulk of the squad to be together for the tournament. so that when the tournament finishes, they can go off on their holidays, and then there'll be obviously a minor sort of pre-season just ahead of the start of the Premier League season. But because of the sort of the tight gap between the end of the Club World Cup and the start of the Premier League season, it really does restrict what Chelsea can do before the season starts. So that's why they want these players in. And of course, as we heard the news yesterday, there is a sort of special transfer window opening from June the 1st to June the 10th that has been agreed by the Premier League, and this was brought in by FIFA to help clubs that are participating in the Club World Cup. So I wouldn't be surprised if Chelsea try and get their business done in that sort of June the 1st to 10th win. In terms of incomings, like I said, they definitely want a striker and a winger, and you can imagine that they would want to be part of the squad in that month to be competing in America.
Tim, when you look at the other teams in the Premier League, where do you put Chelsea's transfer strategy in the pecking order in terms of effectiveness, and also other clubs looking at it and going, "Oh wow, I wish we were doing it that way"? Do you think people are envious of the business that Chelsea are doing, or are they still maybe as confused as sometimes you are?
I mean, they'll be envious of
not
the,
in general,
of the money
but just on Chelsea.
They'll be envious of the money that they've got to spend for sure. But I mean, Chelsea have got the most expensive squad ever assembled in the history of football. You can't look away from that, and they've not got much to show for it really. We're talking they might have spent $1 billion, $1.5 billion. The net spend is sort of 800 million, I think, in the last 5 years, according to Transfermarkt. By far the most in the Premier League. And in those 5 years, which sort of started with the season they won the Champions League, they've massively regressed. I know they've been through huge turmoil and huge changes in terms of the ownership and staff and management and players, but they haven't got much to show for it yet. 12th, 6th, maybe 4th, 5th, 6th again. Obviously they've gone down a very different route with their strategy, and maybe in 3 years, these players sort of beautifully mature and grow together, and everyone says Chelsea were right, and they win the Champions League, and Caicedo and Fernandes and Jackson and Palmer, are all superstars in their own right. But I don't really see that happening. But I do admire them for trying something different. And we see that elsewhere in the Premier League, I guess, with the likes of Brentford and Brighton, of course, as well. But Chelsea, the world's biggest spenders, they don't have to be that clever. They don't have to buy potential. They've always had this sort of revolving door of sacking good managers after a season and revolving door of players. But they would go out and then hire World Cup winning managers or Champions League winning managers rather than some guys just won the championship. Or they'd go and they'd bring in Shevchenko or Ballack or Thiago Silva rather than Dewsbury Hall. So I'm picking out silly examples perhaps, but there's truth to it. I don't see why, when they've got so much money to spend and they're the world's biggest spenders and it's the most expensively assembled squad in history, they're still buying potential because there's so much risk loaded with that.
So Simon, we spoke a little bit earlier on about how much impact Enzo Maresca has on the transfer business that Chelsea do. What's the feeling behind the scenes on actually whether he's going to be there next season and get an opportunity to be working with those players, whoever they are, that come in over the summer? Is there confidence?
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of heard no, even in the sort of the downturn, noises haven't been sort of obviously concerned, but not sort of too negative towards Maresca. I think you have to look at if you sort of go back to last summer, is kind of a significant point to make because, of course, Pochettino left. His contract was a 2+1 contract, and one of the reasons why he left was because they didn't want to go into the Club World Cup with question marks over whether he was staying or not. Maresca, they gave a 5-year contract, like they did Graham Potter, and they very much sort of see this season as a 2-in-1 season because the Club World Cup essentially is a bridge to 25-26. When it comes to Chelsea, it's like one of those terms and conditions that you hear on adverts, sort of thing. That right at the end, you sort of always have to sort of do the caveat of never say never, because this is the bonkers football club that has a high turnover of head coaches, as you've already referred to. But as things stand, I don't think they're thinking about getting rid of Maresca. That might disappoint some of his detractors in the stands, but I think he's sort of seen as having a positive first season, even though the results over the last few months has been disappointing, as I've already said.
Tim, how much of an impact do you think on that decision-making process that will happen in some way, shape, or form over the summer? Not to say that he's going to leave, because he's doing a good job and they're fourth at the moment. How much of it will hinge on whether they get into the Champions League?
I mean, I guess if you take last season as the bar to start from, they ended so well under Pochettino, finished sixth. You've got to show improvement, I think, as a club, especially with the money that they've spent. And fifth would be an improvement and equal Champions League, and it's in their hands. I would definitely have concerns for them in terms of finishing fifth. If you look at their form for some time now, you look at the form table for sort of the last 10, 12 games, they're down in the bottom half of the table. And a couple of recent home wins, over Leicester and Southampton, have not sort of papered over those cracks. And you look at their results in the last couple of months, and they tend to beat the teams at the bottom end of the table: Southampton, Leicester, Wolves, and West Ham are their sort of only victories since 15th of December in the league. And then when they come up against better teams, high quality teams, certainly away from home, Man City, Brighton, Villa, Arsenal, all defeats. And then you look at the run-in, which is one of the toughest, I think, in the league. Statistically, certainly one of the toughest. They've got sort of Brentford and Fulham away. They end the season at Forest away. They've got Liverpool to come. They've got Newcastle away. It's a real tough run-in. And with injury concerns recently and form concerns, people like Cole Palmer, it's hard to make a case for them when you compare to like Newcastle and Brighton, who've really sort of got their act together in the last couple of months. I think Forest and City will probably make up the rest of the top four, and that fifth spot at the moment, I think you'd say Newcastle or Brighton, you'd favour them over Chelsea. So it's going to take a bit of a change in an upturn in form to get that Champions League football. It doesn't. I wouldn't call it make or break for Maresca at all. I'd like to think he's been brought in for the long term. He's got a style of football with a very high tariff that, if it works, will be like, wow, this could be pretty incredible if it works with the right players, but it needs time. So I don't think he necessarily needs Champions League football, but do you know what? I was going to say the club do from a financial point of view, but then if they're going to get 80 million from the Club World Cup, then that sort of balances it out, doesn't it, really? So good for you, Chelsea.
But is that the case, Simon? Is it pivotal for the finances that they get Champions League football for the longer term, for more of a longer term sort of foundation stone for their finances?
I wouldn't say pivotal for this year, but there's only so long you can rely on selling players, and particularly homegrown players for straight profit. Chelsea also don't have a front of shirt sponsor, and one of the reasons why they've kind of delayed it, there's a lot of scrutiny on why a front of shirt sponsor hasn't happened. But Chelsea are looking for the best deal, best long term deal possible, and understandably there's a much bigger pitch from as far as they're concerned if they're a Champions League club versus being as they are right now, a Conference League club. They can argue for a much higher sum. But yeah, going down the line, look, it's not even just about finances. It's a prestige. Chelsea don't want to be playing in Conference League. This is not their recent modern history. They're a Champions League club that are used to fighting in the Champions. The reason they're in the FIFA Club World Cup is because they won it in 2021. Well, that won't get them a ticket in the next staging of the tournament in 2029. And of course, as Tim has already mentioned, that's a tidy bit of money you can earn from being in it. So I just think it's not just about finances. It's where Chelsea are going as a club. And of course, if they're competing for the Champions League in terms of those positions, they're also competing high up in the table. And And look, their season right now is on a bit of a knife edge. I mean, we're talking about them being in fourth, but they're only 4 or 5 points ahead of 10th. And that's why I sort of have to say the never say never thing, that if Chelsea finish sort of mid-table and of course don't go on to win the Conference League, which they've been strong favourites for from the get-go, there's inevitably going to be questions have to be asked of Maresca, even though he's got this 5-year deal. And perhaps more worryingly for him is, as Pochettino and Potter experienced, if the fans turn against him, which they've already started to do, it's a very difficult task to win them back. I mean, Pochettino managed to sort of end on a bit of a high with those 5 straight wins at the end of last season, but we shouldn't forget that last February, last March, the Chelsea fans were telling him in no uncertain terms what they thought of him. So it's really that sort of balance as far as Maresca's popularity with the Chelsea fan base is concerned.
And Tim, a question to you in terms of what's the bigger issue at Chelsea? Do you think it's managerial issues and not necessarily having the right fit or long enough for each manager to actually bed in, or it's everything that's going on behind the scenes and the sort of the shifting sands at the moment?
I mean, most clubs live or die on recruitment, and this is a long-term project with players who need time to blossom and improve. And we've seen improvements in the likes of Caicedo and Fernandes. They just do need a bit of time. The problem is when you spend that amount of money, there's going to be little patience, I guess, inside or outside the club for it to work. And there's going to be a lot of pressure, and there's going to be a lot of focus on them. And if those results don't come quickly, then the temptation is to change it, and that's when you get these sort of revolving cycles of going from one very short era to another. So I think, the recruitment's where I'd start. I think Enzo Maresca's proved himself to be an intelligent, good manager who's done well in his short career so far, and they need to stick with someone at the end of the day. You don't get a Klopp or a Guardiola from changing your manager every year. So I think he's done enough, not regardless of what happens the rest of the season, because if Simon says if they sort of drop to 9th and don't win the Conference League, then he's going to be under a lot of pressure. But I think he's probably done enough to earn another season at least, and that's where you start to create a bit of stability, which is the one thing that Chelsea have lacked for such a long time now.
Just to make the point that it's very hard to tell the fan base what to do as a football club, but one of the problems that the new owners have to cope with is that in the Abramovich era, as we all remember, Chelsea bizarrely succeeded with this hire-and-fire sort of record, that if things weren't working, bring someone else in and they won a trophy. And it's very difficult for, I think, just speaking for the fan base, but I think it's very, very hard for them to accept failure, because they're so used to this sort of bizarre model from the Abramovich era working for them, that suddenly, if a manager is struggling to get a few results together, the natural instinct is to go, well, he's no good, get someone else in. But what is different is the dressing room. The dressing room isn't the same. You don't have Frank Lampard, John Terry, Petr Cech, Didier Drogba to sort of be the stability of the football club. Those characters no longer exist. So it's very hard as a football club, as a football fan base, to move on and to accept this sort of project mantra and this process. It's all part of a process. And I'm not sure, it's going to take a long time for them to ever do that. I think that until they see some material success, a trophy, there is always going to be that sort of, this guy isn't working out, right, let's go find somebody else. And that's part of the problem, I'd say.
Simon, appreciate your time today.
Pleasure.
And thanks to you, Tim, as always.
Cheers, Adam.
Now, just to finish, we want to hear from you. We're asking you to fill out a quick survey about you and your podcasting habits by going to theathletic.com/athletic/ survey25. 3 lucky entries are going to win £100 or dollars worth of Amazon vouchers as well. So whether you're a long-time listener or a new one, we want to get your feedback. Go to theathletic.com/athletic/survey25. The link is also in this episode description. Thanks very much. We'll see you soon.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.